It's time for Pokemon Adventures Volume 8. Before I actually talk about the manga, let's talk about the games.
Pokemon Gold and Silver was released in North America on October 14th of 2000, and I got it for my 12th birthday a few days later.
I still have it to this day. It somehow avoided being sold at a garage sale against my knowledge.
The game took place in the Johto region, and was perhaps one of the biggest generational jumps. There were 2 new types of Pokemon added, the Dark and Steel types. You had 2 regions to explore, 100 new Pokemon. There was Pokemon breeding, shiny Pokemon, characters now had names, so you weren't just battling endless bug catchers. The move deleter was introduced, and there was an internal clock that would change the time of day and the day of the week. The game felt massive. The game wasn't without its flaws. The internal clock drained the battery much faster, so when the battery died early, so did all of your progress. It also introduced, in my opinion, one of the worst features of the games, roaming legendary Pokemon that flee from battle.
Maybe I'm just being a bit old and cranky here, but legendary Pokemon are supposed to sit their ass down in one predetermined spot and wait until I decide to catch them. I do not have the time or patience to go and find them.
To me, Generation 2 has got to be one of the biggest games in this series. From getting your first Pokemon to fighting the final battle with Red, I think the only game that has come close to that much content has been the remakes and Pokemon Black and White. And want to know something else that Generation 2 did well? You could catch the other version's legendary Pokemon.
Now that the introductions are done, let's move on to Volume 8.
There are some things that I would like to point out on the cover. Starting this volume, the adventures is whatever shade the background is. Also, they added a gold and silver subtitle. I remember at the time of release, I thought this was poorly thought out for 2 reasons. The first, I wondered if for Volume 10, they would add Crystal to that. The second, before knowing the fate of Volume 15, I thought that there would be 5 different game titles on there. My theory is, it's just there to show you what story arc you're currently in, just in case you couldn't actually tell from the completely new character on the cover or the Generation 2 Pokemon. However, there is a small problem with my theory. Let's look at the spines of the books. Unless I'm from a parallel universe and everyone stores books in some other much more efficient way here, the spines lack the gold and silver subtitle.
Funny story, first time I saw Gold way back when, I thought he was holding a sword. Yeah, that was before the whole no weapons in the mythos thing.
On the back cover, we have Mr. and Mrs. not appearing in this volume in their Generation 2 designs. More exciting Pokemon adventures!
Gee, I never would have guessed.
First, someone steals Gold's backpack full of Pokeballs and Pokemon.
Well, what else do you put in them? I put tea bags in them, but I'm pretty sure I'm in the minority.
I'm now going to the Story So Far page. This might be more of a nitpick, but they use the term young man for Gold. When I hear young man, I think of someone who is 19 years old or in his early 20s. I don't think of an 11-year-old boy as a young man. We open up with Gold being woken up. He also takes having a drowsy in his room and a kakuna on his head much better than I would have. And we're back to Chibis. After the Zelda manga, this is just painful. We then jump to Professor Elm, who is talking to himself, which is really fortunate for us because we get some exposition. We learn that it has been 1 year since the battle with the Elite Four.
And that's it. A whole page dedicated to something that could have been a text box or the plot summary page.
We switch back to Gold, and he is listening to DJ Mary about to sing her new song, A Boy and His Lapras.
What? Did they just... What? Why have I never noticed that before? I'm gonna need a few minutes to recover from my mind just being blown.
Okay, the reason why I never noticed before is because in the Singapore version it's called Riding on the Stars. I'm gonna try and get through this as fast as possible.
The Singapore version had used Viz's first translation for the first 7 volumes. However, since Viz stopped translating, Shu and Yi had to do their own translations to continue the series. This leads us to several differences in their translations. For instance, the character that is introduced in the next few pages is called Joey in the Viz version. However, he is called Grant in the Singapore version. Viz's translation is more faithful to the games. For example, the stages in Sprout Tower are named after the NPCs in the games, while the Singapore version does a pun for the stages' names. And now back to the review.
The song is interrupted and Gold looks out into his yard where he meets youngster Joey. Joey was trying to deliver a bag to Professor Elm. However, it was stolen by a Murkrow, along with Gold's antenna. Ignoring that it looks more like a satellite dish to me than an antenna, there is something else. According to Viz's translation, this has apparently happened before. If that's the case, why wasn't the antenna bolted down? Also, it has a nest in your yard. Why didn't you chase it off if you knew about Murkrow's habits? But that's all irrelevant, as now we get to see Gold in action, and it is awesome and refreshing. The other Pokédex holders were just such goody two-shoes that seeing someone actually act like a bratty 10 or 11-year-old is just refreshing. He is selfish. If he helps someone, it is usually to bask in the glory of doing something or for his own personal gain. He is also capable of trick shots with a pool cue, and that would have been a much better Pokédex ability than the one he got stuck with. The next day, Joey and Gold go over to Professor Elm's. Despite Gold wearing shorts, this guy is wearing a long jacket and mitts. On their way to the lab, they meet someone who is scamming a bunch of people.
For this scam to work, it would require nobody in this giant crowd to have a watch or a cell phone. This would easily be believable if this wasn't the generation that introduced the Pokégear.
The guy doesn't look trustworthy at all, and if he talked to the other people like he talked to Gold in Viz's translation, well, everyone in the Pokemon universe are gullible idiots who deserve to be scammed. Also, I can't help but think in this case the scammer is a giant dumbass too. He's only charging 100 Pokédollars for an attempt to catch the Pokemon in his carnival game. Okay, a bottle of fresh water in the game costs 200 Pokédollars. Do you realize how many people you would have to scam in order to make any decent money? And the longer you do it, the more likely people are going to get suspicious that you're cheating. Gold reveals that the guy is cheating, and afterwards his backpack is stolen. We cut to Professor Elm's lab, where we have the introduction of our second protagonist of this arc, Silver. Of course, we all know his real name is ... Also, Sealing Silver is watching you. We also have the introduction of Professor Elm and his magically changing hair. From each panel, Mato can't decide if he has hair on only a small portion or on all of his head. Silver steals Totodile, which allows Professor Elm to give us this line in Viz's version: "How does a Pokeball just disappear?"
Well, clearly someone's never played Smash Brothers.
The Singapore Professor Elm seems slightly smarter, although he immediately assumes that someone stole it. Also, Professor Elm has a ladder in his laboratory. Well, actually, those are poorly drawn stairs as seen a few pages later. Meanwhile, outside, Gold decides to enter Professor Elm's laboratory, through the second floor balcony. He can also apparently jump really high. This is even more impressive since I don't see anything to grab onto besides the top. Upon entering the lab, Gold takes the Cyndaquil to fight against Silver. We switch over to Team Rocket and their first appearance in this story arc. They were the ones who stole Gold's bag, and now they are opening it. And seeing that there are Pokemon inside, they abandon it. Luke, my reaction, please. As we see later, between the three of them, they only have one Pokemon. Why didn't they steal them? Surely domesticated Pokemon can be of some use. Okay, there are actually about 8 people there, and there are 2 more with Pokemon, but they immediately disappear off-panel until they flee in terror, and they are only seen in silhouettes. So I'm just thinking that they are cardboard cutouts, and any additional speech balloons is just a ventriloquist, to make them seem much more intimidating than they actually are. Gold and Silver fight until Gold is knocked unconscious by Team Rocket having a brief moment of competence. Silver then fights against the Team Rocket members. They are apparently learning from Bruno and decide to flee after their one Pokemon is knocked unconscious. In the Singapore version, one of them claims, "Damn, he's too strong."
He knocked out our one baby Pokemon. Whatever shall we do? Seriously, you're 3 grown adults and he is one 11-year-old kid. You can beat the crap out of him. I have really high expectations for the villains of this arc.
To make matters worse, these 3 are reoccurring characters known as the Team Rocket Elite Trio. Since the start of the series, they have used 13 different Pokemon. Silver also flees, leaving Gold to be woken up by the police. Gold was apparently the only person who saw Silver. I'm actually rather surprised that Professor Elm didn't have security cameras or anything in his lab. After Professor Oak's lab got trashed and he got kidnapped 3 years ago, you'd think that they would install something. To make matters worse, apparently Professor Oak's lab did have a security camera, so apparently they only have the stuff when it's convenient to the plot. Our protagonist also heroically lies to the police because he believes he can't rely on them. So now we have obstruction of justice to add to the list of crimes that our protagonists have done. A recap of that list: murder, stealing, arson, and breaking and entering.
Aren't they such wonderful role models?
Several pages later, we meet Professor Oak. He is looking for Silver, who stole his Game Boy Color. Gold decides to ask for a Pokédex. Regardless of the version, Professor Oak makes several excuses for why he won't give Gold a Pokédex.
A Pokédex would be wasted in your hands.
As opposed to red, blue, green, and yellow?
And seriously, even though Silver stole it, it's also wasted in his hands. We've seen him use it to see that the Pokemon he was fighting against was an Elekid, and that was an electric type and would have a poor matchup with his Totodile. Its head is electrical prongs. If you can't tell the typing from that, you need glasses, not a Pokédex. Gold decides to battle against Professor Oak for the Pokédex, however he is defeated by Confuse Ray.
No, not Confuse Ray! It's not like it just inflicted the easiest status effect to cure and I just need to recall the Pokemon!
You know, maybe Confuse Ray was actually targeted at Joey and Gold. In any case, Professor Oak is still attacking kids with Pokemon. Why hasn't his research been shut down for being unethical? Also, Professor Oak shifts the blame, claiming that Gold forced him to do this. You know, two can play the blame game, Professor Oak. Yes, Gold made you use an attack in a Pokemon battle. Gold also made you walk around in this world with a Pokemon and do everything physically possible to invite trainers to battle you. P.S. After 5 generations of being forced into countless Pokemon battles for just walking in front of someone, you're asking for sympathy from the wrong person. Eventually, Professor Oak asks the reoccurring question, what do you see Pokemon as? Gold's response is partners, and Professor Oak gives Gold the Pokédex.
And I'm going to jump ahead a bit because in 2 volumes this apparently counts as being forcefully taken.
No, Professor Oak, giving someone something does not count as forcefully taken. I swear, Professor Oak is rivaling Mew in levels of jackassery, and I could go on and on about him, but I'm only 82 pages into a 218-page volume, and I'm gonna have to blitz through everything else to keep this video short and timely.
Meanwhile, Silver sees his wanted poster, and I'm not spoiling it.
Gold's search for Silver leads him to Sprout Tower. The Singapore version calls it Bellsprout Pagoda. And also in the Singapore version, the sign has Violet at the bottom of the sign, due to it being released in a flipped format. While in the Viz version, you can tell it was supposed to say Violet City. Upon entering Sprout Tower, Gold is attacked by monks who want to shave his head. He wins in battle through tricking his opponents. Any respect I gain for him is quickly destroyed and set on fire as he blackmails the monks and threatens to burn down the tower, possibly destroying history.
He's an asshole! Why did I like him again?
And Gold meets up with Silver once again. Much like the stairs earlier in the volume, perspective has gotten horrible. One moment Silver is on stairs only a few feet away, the next the stairs are suddenly much bigger and Gold is hanging on for dear life over what appears to be a bottomless pit. Gold and Silver fight once again. They are forced to stop fighting and work together with the activation of death traps. Those weren't in the game. Of course, I immediately stop caring as soon as I see the best sound effect that Viz could think of is FAP. We cut to the Pokemon League discussing the events of 1 year ago involving the Elite Four. This being a giant event that involved the fate of the world and the life of every human being alive, they are only getting to it now.
Oh wait, no, sorry, my mistake. That would actually be efficient. Instead, they are talking about the incident in Saffron City from 3 years ago.
They talk about the current Kanto gym leaders and their involvement in Team Rocket. However, someone raises up the point that there was no proof.
What?
You mean like the eyewitness that is in the room who saw Sabrina with a giant R on her shirt, the smuggling ring that was handled by Lieutenant Surge that involved the people of Vermilion City, and the sailors that were in fact arrested, the one that the gym leaders took credit for, not to mention the evolved Pokemon, the secret base in Celadon City. At least one person who was a scientist who worked with Sabrina. There was also the kidnapping of Professor Oak and the destruction of his lab. If you ignore all that, sure, there's no proof at all.
And suddenly the reason why Professor Elm's research lab had no security cameras makes sense. The incident with Professor Oak from 3 years ago was covered up. Everything from Team Rocket was covered up.
In any case, meet the Pokemon League director. He is a different character for each region who looks the same, save for the hairstyle that gets more ridiculous with every generation. This generation's apparently has pubic hair on his head. Also, we learn about an important plot point: the Pokemon storage system is down. At the rooms of Elf, Gold meets Bugsy, and mistakes him for a girl.
Don't worry, Gold. Everyone is gay for Bridget.
We also get to see Gold destroy precious historical ruins. In the ruins of Elf, we meet up with Team Rocket again. They apparently realized that just having one Pokemon between the 3 of them was a completely stupid thing to do, and they now have a Girafarig and a Spinarak. Also, they were unable to solve the Kabuto puzzle.
These 3 are idiots!
In a rare moment of competence from these three, they actually know that spider silk doesn't burn. Yeah, The Legend of Zelda was actually wrong about that. Also, there's this. Who's that Pokemon? It's Aggron! Meanwhile, Silver is getting a Pokeball forged by Kurt. He is an old, bitter man who hates manufactured Pokeballs and pretty much calls them pieces of crap. Silver wanted the heavy ball in order to capture an Ursaring and use it against Team Rocket, who are cutting off the tails of Slowpokes. You know, I expected cutting off tails to be a little bit more, I don't know, bloody? The final round of this book takes place in the Ilex Forest. Gold meets up with someone who is being controlled by a Ghastly.
Ghastly? This seems oddly familiar.
Gold then meets the big bad of the story arc. However, he is getting really sick of this volume's pattern of take a few steps, meet a new character who will be important in a future volume, do something for them, and then he decides to say,
"Whatever. I don't have time for you or your shit. Now get out of my way, or I'm gonna rip that stupid mask off and make you eat it."
And he does just that, and it's awesome, or at least that's what would have happened if this wasn't the first volume in a 7-volume story arc. So the big question is, was this worth the 7.5-year wait? I'm going to say no.
The first time I read this, my expectations were incredibly high, and I promptly walked away disappointed. When you're told you can't have something, you just want it that much more, and I hyped myself up. I expected the world. The volume does its job well. It introduces us to a new protagonist who is unique and stands out from the other Pokédex holders. It expands upon the Pokémon world, the focus this time being the gym leaders, and the process of becoming one. It even introduces the big bad of the story arc. The volume is big. As for the bad, Mato's art is deteriorating. It's getting much more simplistic, sometimes it even looks like doodles. The perspective bugged me, although that really isn't anything new. The art isn't the worst that I've seen from someone who is sick or having difficulty drawing, and it's miles better than anything I could ever draw. The members of Team Rocket continue to baffle me with their sheer incompetence, and it's outright mind-numbing that they would flee after only one Pokemon is defeated, especially since in their last appearance, it took the threat of a cruise ship being dropped on them to stop fighting. Professor Oak and the Pokemon League I could probably rant about for much longer, but there will be plenty of time in future installments for their stupid to be brought under criticism.
I don't know how you're handling this, Cat. I'm just getting dizzy by watching you.